The War Nursery of Xylos was, by galactic consensus, the premier institution for the study of conflict. Its lecture halls were not carved from stone but grown from psychoreceptive crystal, the walls themselves humming with the stored knowledge of 1,000 victorious campaigns. Cadets from every corner of the charted galaxy walked these corridors, hulking, four-armed grok whose species had leveled moons for sport, slender, ethereal lumina who could bend lesser minds like cheap metal, and the reptilian SSSLR, whose every word was a sibilant threat backed by glands brimming with neurotoxin. It was a place where strength was measured in megatons and intellect was a quantifiable weapon system. And it was here, in the primary amphitheater designated Victory's Cradle, that the prevailing opinion on the species known as humanity was about to be academically codified. The air, a carefully balanced cocktail of nitrogen, argon, and trace elements palatable to the several dozen species present, crackled with a unique blend of academic fervor and casual speciesism. Humans. The very name was a sort of galactic punchline. They were the bipedal paradox, a species that had stumbled into space using ridiculously crude chemical rockets, yet had somehow managed to spread like a persistent, low-grade rash. They were universally classified as a Tier 7 nuisance species. Not dangerous enough to warrant orbital bombardment, but too stubborn and populous to ignore entirely. Their file in the Grand Galactic Concordance read like a cosmic garage sale of anxiety. Physically, they were a joke. No natural armor, no claws, no fangs to speak of. Their senses were laughably dull, their strength pathetic. They were squishy, water-filled sacks of fragile bone and inefficient muscle, evolved on a middling world with a gravitational pull so weak it was a wonder they didn't just float away. Socially, they were a mess of contradictory impulses, viciously tribal one moment, bafflingly altruistic the next. They were, in the esteemed opinion of the Concordance's xenobiologists, a prey species that had failed upwards. Presiding over today's lecture was Professor Kthar of the Vexian Dominion. Kthar was the very model of a Vexian warrior scholar, a towering insectoid figure covered in glossy, obsidian chitin that could deflect small arms fire. His multifaceted eyes scanned the assembled cadets, each crystalline lens reflecting the tiered rows of seating. His voice, a series of resonant clicks and chitters translated by the ambient field, was as sharp and precise as his surgical mandibles. "Cadets," he began, the translator smoothing his clicks into crisp, formal standard galactic. "Today, we dissect weakness. We study not the mighty Crothulian battle beast or the strategic genius of a Lumina mind fleet. No. Today, we study the bottom of the food chain. Today, we learn to neutralize a human." A wave of amused murmurs swept through the amphitheater. A young grok cadet, all granite-like muscle and youthful arrogance, flexed his lower set of arms, producing a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. He leaned over to his SSSLR seatmate and rumbled, "A whole lecture on this? You just step on them, don't you?" The SSSLR hissed a dry laugh. "A waft of good venom, perhaps. But the professor is thorough." Indeed, Kthar's voice cut through the chatter, his head swiveling to pin the grok with a dozen of his eyes at once. "Thoroughness is the bedrock of victory, Cadet Brock. You would do well to remember that even the most irritating microbe can fell a giant if its nature is not understood. And humans, for all their manifest failings, are the most successful microbe in this galactic arm." He gestured with a long, scythe-like forelimb towards a shielded door at the side of the stage. "To that end, the conclave has granted us a live specimen for today's practical demonstration. A volunteer, I am assured, from their diplomatic corps." The door hissed open, and the specimen shuffled into view. And he was, to put it mildly, an overwhelming disappointment. The cadets stared, a few of the younger ones openly snickering. This was a human. It was beige. It wore soft, woven fabrics of a dull blue and gray, utterly devoid of any protective function. It stood barely 2 meters tall, and its body lacked any of the clear, defined musculature that signified power. It was soft around the middle, its face unadorned with warrior markings or threat displays. It looked less like a representative of a starfaring species and more like something that had gotten lost on its way to a nap. This was Jake Miller. He offered a small, polite wave to the silent, staring crowd of alien warriors in training. He had the slightly tired, infinitely patient expression of a man who has spent a significant portion of his life waiting in lines. His hair was a nondescript brown, his eyes a matching shade. He was about as threatening as a damp towel. Jake ambled to the center of the demonstration platform, the floor of which was a programmable material that could simulate various terrains and energy fields. He gave Professor Kthar a nod. "Morning, Professor." Or, whatever the local equivalent is. "Ready when you are." Kthar's mandibles twitched in a gesture of Vexian distaste. The creature's casualness was grating. "Specimen designation, Jake," the professor announced to the class. "Observe, cadets. The classic human form. Bipedal, granting it height but creating a critical instability. Minimal integumentary protection, its skin can be breached by a stiff breeze. Its primary manipulators, or hands, possess some dexterity but lack any piercing or crushing capability." He projected a schematic of Jake onto the large screen behind him, highlighting what the Vexian textbook considered critical weaknesses. The spine. The neck. The soft, unprotected abdomen. The diagram looked less like a military analysis and more like a butcher's chart. "The human survival strategy is predicated on 3 pillars," Kthar lectured, pacing back and forth like a caged predator. 1. Pack bonding. They are rarely found alone and derive psychological comfort from proximity to others. 2. Tool use. Lacking natural weapons, they are pathologically dependent on external technology. 3. Illogical persistence. They will often continue a futile endeavor long after a more rational species would have retreated. Jake, listening to this breakdown, just rocked back on his heels, hands shoved casually in his pockets. He looked for all the world like he was listening to a particularly dry weather report. He caught the eye of the sneering Grok cadet in the third row and gave him a little wink. The Grok's expression soured from arrogance to confusion. "Our lesson today," Kthar continued, ignoring the specimen's unsettling placidity, "is to exploit these weaknesses. We will demonstrate, in controlled scenarios, the most efficient methods of incapacitating a human subject, both physically and psychologically." He gestured to a sleek, floating drone that detached itself from a recess in the ceiling. "We begin with simple physical subjugation." This was the central challenge. The lecture itself. The entire curriculum for the day was based on a single, fundamental, and galactically cherished misunderstanding. The textbook said humans were fragile. The professor believed it. The cadets were eager to see it proven. And Jake. Jake was just waiting. "This is a standard Tier 3 training drone," Kthar explained. "It is programmed to subdue a subject of the human's mass and strength profile using non-lethal force. Its manipulators are calibrated to exert precisely enough pressure to restrain, not to crush. Observe." With a flick of a command on his datapad, the drone whirred to life. It zipped towards Jake, its metallic limbs extending into a cage-like formation, designed to envelop and immobilize. The cadets leaned forward. This was the opening move, the simple proof of concept. The drone was faster than any unarmored biological could hope to be. Its programming was flawless. The human would be neatly and efficiently contained. The drone lunged. And Jake wasn't there. He hadn't moved in a blur of impossible speed. He had simply shifted. A slight turn of the hips, a pivot on the ball of one foot, a casual lean to the side. It was an act of such minimal effort it was almost insulting. The drone, its trajectory locked, shot past him, its grasping claws closing on empty air. It was programmed for a stationary or fleeing target, a prey animal. It was not programmed for a target that would treat its attack with the same energy one might use to dodge a slow-moving toddler. Before the drone's logic circuits could recalculate, Jake's hand shot out. Not in a punch or a strike, but with a strange, precise delicacy. His fingers found a seam in the drone's casing, a spot where a maintenance panel was recessed. With a practiced twist and pull that spoke of long familiarity, he ripped the panel clean off. A spray of multicolored wires spilled out like metallic guts. He hooked 2 fingers into the mess, tugged on a specific red-sheathed cable, and the drone immediately went dead, its lights flickering out as it clattered to the floor with a pathetic final clank. Jake looked at the dead machine, then up at the stunned professor. He held up the severed power conduit. "Sorry about that," he said, his tone genuinely apologetic. Force of habit. On these older T3 models, the primary power relay is right behind the dorsal maintenance panel. It's a bit of a design flaw, really. You can just yank it. He tossed the wire aside. Silence. A thick, profound silence filled the amphitheater. The Grok cadet's mouth was slightly agape. The SSSLR was frozen, its forked tongue hanging motionless in the air. Professor Kthar stared at the inert drone, then at the human, then back at the drone. His datapad, which contained the entire Vexian military's accumulated knowledge on human anatomy, did not mention a preternatural instinct for droid mechanics. An anomaly, Kthar finally managed, his translated voice having lost some of its crispness. It now sounded a bit like grinding static. The specimen has clearly had prior experience with this specific model. A contaminated sample. No matter, he was flustered, his composure cracking like a fault line in his chitinous ego. He tapped furiously at his datapad, skipping ahead in his lesson plan. "We will proceed to environmental stressors," he announced, a little too loudly. Humans evolved on a temperate, low-gravity world designated Earth. Their biology is notoriously sensitive to atmospheric variations. Cadets, observe the specimen's biomonitor readouts on the main screen. The display behind Jake flickered to life, showing his heart rate, blood oxygen saturation, body temperature, and neural activity. All were placid, resting well within what the Vexian medical texts defined as normal human parameters. "Platform, initiate simulation Gamma 7, Kthar commanded. Standard toxic atmosphere. A corrosive airborne neuroagent common in the swamps of Sklax. Vents in the floor hissed, releasing a sickly yellow-green gas that swirled around Jake's ankles, then rose to envelop him. To the SSSLR, whose homeworld had similar environments, the gas smelled of imminent, agonizing death. Their own physiology could withstand it for perhaps 30 seconds before their respiratory systems would begin to dissolve. The cadets watched the biomonitor, expecting to see the human's vitals spike, his heart rate skyrocketing, his neural waves screaming with panic and pain. Instead, Jake took a slow, deep breath, his chest rising and falling visibly. He held it for a moment, then exhaled with a relaxed sigh. On the screen, his heart rate dropped by 2 beats per minute. His blood oxygen remained perfectly stable. His brainwaves shifted, but not towards fear. They sharpened into a pattern of focused alertness, a state the Lumina cadets recognized as deep concentration. Jake sniffed the air again, a thoughtful look on his face. "Huh," he said to the room at large, his voice slightly muffled by the dense gas but still perfectly calm. "Smells a bit like Newark. You get a sort of metallic tang in the back of your throat, right? It's not bad. Kind of nostalgic, actually." The SSSLR cadet who had been so confident earlier began to tremble. Newark. The name meant nothing, but the implication was horrifying. The human was comparing a Class 4 chemical weapon to the ambient atmosphere of a location on his homeworld. And finding it nostalgic. Increase the concentration. Kthar snapped, his forelimbs clicking together in agitation. Maximum safe levels. The gas thickened, turning the air around Jake into an opaque, mustard-colored soup. On the screen, Jake's vitals remained stubbornly, infuriatingly stable. After a full minute, he gave a small cough. Not a choking, dying gasp, but a polite little ahem of a cough. "Okay, now it's getting a little spicy," his voice drifted out of the cloud. Reminds me of that time my college roommate tried to clean the oven with bleach and ammonia. Phew. Had to air the dorm out for a week. Kthar stared, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Bleach? Ammonia? What were these terrifying chemical agents the humans casually deployed in their domestic habitats? He jabbed a claw at his console, cutting off the gas. As the filtration systems sucked the toxic cloud away, Jake was revealed, standing exactly as he had been, looking entirely unharmed. He just blinked a few times, rubbing his eyes. "Makes your eyes water a bit," he commented cheerfully. The professor was in a full-blown spiral. His lecture was in ruins. His specimen was not cooperating. His understanding of the universe was beginning to feel like a poorly constructed piece of furniture. He skipped the next 3 modules, heat tolerance, cold tolerance, and radiation exposure, assuming, correctly, that they would only lead to further humiliation. He went straight for the final, guaranteed tool, psychological warfare. The human mind, Kthar declared, his voice a desperate attempt at regaining authority, is its greatest weakness. It is a fragile construct, prone to irrational fear and panic. Their pack-bonding instinct is a vulnerability. Isolate them, present them with an overwhelming predator stimulus, and their psyche will simply collapse. He activated the centerpiece of the Academy's psychological warfare suite, the phasic fear emitter. It was a Lumina-designed device that didn't project images or sounds, but broadcasted a low-frequency psychic wave that directly stimulated the amygdala, the fear center, of most carbon-based lifeforms. It simulated the pure, primal terror of being hunted by an inescapable apex predator. When used on captive space fauna, it could induce cardiac arrest. Against a prey species like a human, the effect should be immediate and catastrophic. The emitter, a crystalline dish in the ceiling, glowed with a soft, violet light. A low hum filled the room, a sound that was felt more than heard. The Grok cadet, Brock, felt the fur on his neck bristle. The SSS-LAR instinctively coiled in its seat. It was a deeply unpleasant sensation, a cold dread that seeped into the bone. They all turned their eyes to the biomonitor, expecting to see Jake's neural activity explode into a supernova of terror. Jake yawned. It was a wide, jaw-cracking, unapologetic yawn. He stretched his arms over his head, his spine popping audibly. On the screen, his brainwaves, which had been in a state of placid alertness, shifted into the slow, rolling waves of drowsiness. The fear emitter was putting him to sleep. "Man, that humming is making me tired," Jake mumbled, blinking slowly. "Is it almost lunchtime?" One of the Lumina cadets, a prodigy named Lyra, squinted, her silver eyes glowing as she focused her own psionic senses on the human. Standard procedure was to avoid direct mental contact, but this was an unprecedented situation. She needed to understand what was happening. She gently extended a tendril of her consciousness towards Jake's mind, expecting to find a screaming vortex of panic being suppressed by some unknown biological mechanism. What she found instead was quiet. It was a vast, still ocean of calm. But beneath the surface, there was something else. Not fear. It was a filing system. It was a meticulously organized library of terror. She caught glimpses, echoes of concepts that had no parallel in her own mind. A dark room in a childhood home. The sound of screeching tires. The uncanny valley of a doll's eyes. The chilling, quiet dread of a tax audit. A horror film about a clown that lived in the sewers. The existential despair of assembling IKEA furniture. It was a psyche that had been so thoroughly saturated with fear, in so many mundane and exotic flavors, that it had catalogued it, categorized it, and filed it away under B for boring. The professor's fear emitter was like trying to intimidate a master librarian by showing them a single, uninteresting book. Lyra recoiled as if burned, her silver eyes wide with shock. She looked at her instructor, her own mind now a whirlwind of confusion. "Professor," she transmitted on a private channel, her mental voice trembling. His mind, it's not reacting with fear. It's classifying the stimulus. It has filed your apex predator simulation somewhere between waiting for a package to arrive and mild indigestion. Kthar's composure finally, irrevocably shattered. His meticulous lesson plan was not just failing, it was being actively mocked by the specimen's biology. The cadets were no longer snickering. They were watching with a mixture of rapt attention and growing unease. The human was not weak. He was not fragile. He was something else. Something the textbooks had gotten catastrophically wrong. In a fit of pure, unadulterated rage and academic desperation, Kthar did something no instructor at the war nursery had done in 100 cycles. He slammed his primary claw on the emergency release panel on his console. "Override all safety protocols," he shrieked, his translator struggling to keep up with his clicks. "Release the live specimen. We will have a proper demonstration." An alarm blared, a sound that signaled a genuine, unsimulated crisis. A heavy-duty Durasteel gate at the far end of the platform ground upwards, revealing a darkened, cavernous tunnel. A low growl, a gut-churning rumble of pure predatory intent, echoed from the darkness. The cadets gasped. Even Brock, the arrogant Grok, felt a jolt of actual fear. They all knew what was kept in that pen. This wasn't a training drone or a simulated gas. This was a Kralgorian spinehound. A bioengineered killing machine, a six-limbed monstrosity of muscle, claw, and reflex. It was the Academy's living benchmark for an apex predator, used only for graduating cadets in heavily armed mechs. It was 2 tons of genetically perfected violence, and it had just been released into a room with an unarmored human. The spinehound stalked out of the tunnel, its yellow eyes glowing with feral hunger. Its body was a nightmare of overlapping bone plates and corded muscle, with a ridge of quivering, venom-tipped spines running down its back. It took one look at the soft, fleshy creature standing in the middle of the platform, registered it as food, and lowered its head to charge. The amphitheater held its collective breath. Several cadets instinctively closed their eyes. Kthar watched, a grim satisfaction warring with the dawning horror of what he had just done. This would prove his point. Violently. Irreversibly. The human would scream. It would run. It would die. The lesson would be learned. The spinehound lunged, a blur of grey death covering the distance in a heartbeat. And Jake smiled. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He stood his ground, his posture shifting from relaxed to rooted. As the beast closed in, its drooling maw gaping wide, Jake did something utterly insane. He took a step forward. He locked eyes with the predator. No fear. No submission. Just a calm, unwavering, challenging stare. And then he made a noise. Not a word, but a short, sharp, tisk. It was the sound a human might make to scold a misbehaving pet. The spinehound, a creature that had never in its life encountered prey that didn't cower, skidded to a halt. Its predatory brain short-circuited. Its programming screamed, kill, but its senses screamed, danger. This small, soft thing was not acting like food. It was acting like a bigger predator. Confusion warred with instinct. It let out a frustrated, uncertain snarl. Jake took another slow, deliberate step forward. He held out one hand, palm open and non-threatening. "Easy now, big fella," he said, his voice a low, soothing baritone. "You're a handsome devil, aren't you? But we're not going to do this today." "No, we are not." While the beast was frozen in its state of cognitive dissonance, Jake's other hand moved. He slipped it into his pocket and pulled out a small, crinkly, silver object. It was the wrapper from the protein bar he'd eaten on the shuttle over. He flicked his wrist, and the foil wrapper crackled loudly in the silent room. Crinkle crinkle snap. The alien sound, sharp and unpredictable, drew the spinehound's full attention. Its massive head tilted, its yellow eyes focusing on the strange, shiny thing. It was a classic misdirection, a tactic so simple, so primal, that the Academy's advanced strategic doctrines had never even considered it. In that moment of distraction, Jake closed the final distance. He didn't strike. He didn't flee. He reached out his open hand and, with the calm confidence of a veterinarian approaching a nervous dog, he began to scratch the spinehound right behind one of its quivering auditory frills. It was a spot he couldn't possibly have known about, a cluster of sensitive nerves at the base of the skull. The effect was instantaneous and utterly unbelievable. The 2-ton biological weapon of mass destruction shuddered. Its venomous spines retracted with a soft click. A low, rumbling sound started deep in its chest, not a growl, but a purr. Its massive body swayed, its legs buckled, and it collapsed onto its side with a heavy thud, its eyes rolling back in its head in a state of pure, unadulterated bliss. Its tail, a thick, armored cudgel, gave a single, happy thump against the platform floor. The silence in Victory's cradle was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of 1,000 hardened, militaristic minds being wiped completely clean. It was the silence of dogma dying. Professor Kthar stared, his mandibles hanging fully open, a string of Vexian drool spattering onto his console. Cadet Brock, the mighty Grok, had sunk so low in his seat that only the top of his head was visible. Lyra, the Lumina prodigy, was staring at Jake not as a specimen, but as one might stare at a newly discovered, terrifying law of physics. Jake gave the purring spinehound one last affectionate pat on its bony head. "Who's a good eldritch horror?" "You are," he cooed. Then he stood up, brushed a bit of monster drool off his pants, and turned to face the petrified audience. He looked directly at Professor Kthar, and that same polite, unassuming, terrifyingly patient smile returned to his face. "Professor," Jake said, his voice calm and clear in the crushing silence. "Your lesson for today was on how to kill a human." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Want to know the real way?" No one answered. No one could. Kthar could only manage a pathetic, choked clicking sound. Jake didn't seem to need a reply. He took it as an invitation. "You see," he began, his tone shifting into that of a patient teacher explaining a complex but fascinating subject, "your whole premise is wrong. Your textbook, your analysis, all of it. You've been looking at us completely backwards. You classified my homeworld, Earth, as a temperate, low-gravity, garden world. That's not what it is. In the Galactic Standard Classification System, Earth isn't a garden. It's a Class 12 death world." A few confused murmurs rippled through the cadets. Class 12. That was a theoretical designation. A planet so hostile to life that complex organisms shouldn't be able to evolve there at all. "Let's start with gravity," Jake continued, holding up a single finger. "You think our world is low G. You're wrong. Your standard G is based on the median of all habitable worlds, most of which are large, low-density gas dwarf planets or tidally locked moons. My world's gravity, what we call 1G, is nearly twice your galactic standard. That means right now, just standing here, I am functionally lifting another version of myself on my back compared to what you're used to. Every step I take is a feat of strength. Your strongest Grok cadet, Brock, I believe." Jake nodded towards the now cowering Grok. "He's impressive. On my world, his muscle density wouldn't be enough to let him climb a flight of stairs without getting winded. We do exercises called push-ups where we lie on the ground and push the entire planet away from us, over and over. We do it for fun." Brock made a small, whimpering sound. "To our environment," Jake said, raising a second finger. "You pumped this room full of what you call a toxic neuroagent. I called it Newark. That's a city. The air I breathe every day is 21% oxygen. You all breathe nitrogen or argon mixes. Do you know what oxygen is? It's a hypercorrosive, highly volatile gas. It's responsible for rust, for decay, for fire. We live and breathe a slow-burning chemical fire our entire lives. Our immune systems aren't sterile protocols like yours, they're a planetary-scale arms race that has been running hot for 3 billion years. We are walking ecosystems of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, all constantly trying to kill each other and us. Your sterile, pristine homeworlds are beautiful, I'm sure. But a human common cold, which for us is a mild inconvenience, would be an extinction-level plague on most of your planets. The SSSLR cadet looked as if he was about to be physically ill. He suddenly felt very exposed. 3. The locals, Jake's voice took on a more enthusiastic tone. You brought out your apex predator, he gestured with his thumb back at the still purring spinehound. He's a good boy. Very impressive. On Earth, he'd be a mid-tier contender. He might be able to take on a particularly angry wild boar. Maybe. We have creatures called grizzly bears. They're like your spinehound, but bigger, smarter, and they can climb trees faster than you can run. We have great white sharks, which are basically torpedoes with teeth. We have saltwater crocodiles that have the strongest bite force of any animal on the planet and can hold their breath for over an hour. They are ambush predators perfected. He paused, letting the images sink in. And that's just the big stuff. Let's talk about the small stuff. We have snakes whose venom can liquefy your internal organs in minutes. We have spiders whose bites cause necrosis. We have tiny, delicate jellyfish that can kill you with a single touch. We have an entire continent, Australia, where it feels like the planet's evolutionary engine had a nervous breakdown and decided to weaponize everything. We have insects, tiny little flying things called mosquitoes, that have killed more humans than all of our own wars combined. We don't have planetary defense grids to shoot them down. We invented a special scented lotion to make them leave us alone. And sometimes, it doesn't even work. Illumina Cadet fainted. Which brings me to my fourth and most important point, Jake said, his friendly demeanor becoming something harder, something ancient and cold. Our psychology. You used a fear emitter on me. Professor, my species invented the horror movie. We tell each other ghost stories around a campfire for entertainment. We build roller coasters to simulate falling to our deaths. We voluntarily jump out of perfectly good aircraft with nothing but a silk sheet to save us. We climb mountains of frozen water with ice picks. We do this for recreation. Your machine, which broadcasts the primal terror of being hunted by an apex predator. For me, that wasn't terror. It was Tuesday. It registered in my brain as low-grade background noise. You cannot scare a species that has institutionalized terror as a form of entertainment. He took a step closer to Kthar's console, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. You think our weakness is pack bonding. You call it a dependency. We call it a force multiplier. You think our weakness is persistence. We were persistence hunters. We weren't the fastest or the strongest animals on our planet. We were the ones that just didn't stop. We would chase our prey for days, across scorching plains, until it collapsed from sheer exhaustion. We ran it to death. We weaponized stubbornness. He looked around the room, making eye contact with every single terrified cadet he could. Your textbook lists us as a Tier 7 nuisance. That is the single greatest strategic advantage my species has ever had. You see us as weak, squishy, harmless prey. And so you don't see the truth until it's too late. You don't see the Class 12 Deathworlder that can out-endure, outthink, and out-stubborn anything in this room. You don't see the creature whose body is a chemical factory and whose mind is a fortress built on a foundation of casual horror. He leaned in close to Professor Kthar, his face just inches from the Vexian's horrified, multifaceted eyes. So, you want to know the real way to kill a human? Jake's voice was soft, reasonable, and utterly terrifying. It's not with a drone. We'll take it apart. It's not with poison. We'll probably find it nostalgic. It's not with a monster. We'll either kill it, eat it, or try to domesticate it. And it is absolutely not with fear. We'll just get bored. The only way to truly kill a human, is to make us give up. To break our spirit. To convince us that there is absolutely no hope left. And the problem with that strategy, Professor, is that our entire history is a testament to the fact that we are pathologically incapable of believing that's ever true. Your textbook says we're prey. Your textbook is wrong. Jake straightened up, his chilling intensity vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, replaced once more by that mild, pleasant demeanor. We're not the prey. We're the things that evolved to hunt the monsters. He let that final statement settle into the dead air of the room. Professor Kthar stared blankly for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, he raised a single, trembling claw to his console. With a few shaky taps, he accessed his personal files. He highlighted a document titled, On the Strategic Neutralization of Minor Species, Volume 1, Humans. He highlighted his 30 years of research. His life's work. And he hit delete. The file vanished with a soft, digital chime that sounded like a death knell. Kthar then slowly, methodically, began to fold himself down, tucking his limbs in, making himself as small as a Vexian of his size possibly could. It was a posture of total, unconditional surrender. Across the amphitheater, the reaction was a silent, cascading wave of existential dread. Brock was no longer trying to look small, he was actively trying to phase through the floor via sheer force of will. The SSSLR cadets were examining their own venom glands with a newfound sense of inadequacy. The Lumina were shielding their minds, not out of protocol, but out of a primal fear of what they might see if they looked at the human again. They had felt the edges of his mind, and it felt like staring into the heart of a star. Just then, a side door opened and a harried-looking Xylosian administrator, a being of living wood and sap, scurried onto the stage. He looked at the collapsed professor, the catatonic cadets, and the blissfully unconscious spinehound being gently cuddled by the human. His woody face went pale. Mr. Miller, the administrator chirped, his voice sounding like rustling leaves. My deepest, most profound apologies. There was a mix-up in the scheduling. You were supposed to be in Lecture Hall Beta 9, giving the guest lecture on, Introduction to Interspecies Trade and Bartering. This is Advanced Combat Theory. Jake looked up from petting the spinehound. He gave the administrator that same, easygoing smile. Oh, no worries at all, he said cheerfully. It was an interesting afternoon. I think we made some real progress here on intercultural understanding. He stood up, giving the spinehound one last pat. Say, all this lecturing has made me a bit peckish. Is the commissary still open? I could really go for a barbecue sandwich and some of that weird blue soda you guys have. The administrator just stared, his leafy appendages trembling. He didn't know what a barbecue was, but the word itself, spoken so casually by this creature, was suddenly the most terrifying sound in the known galaxy. He could only nod numbly. As Jake ambled off the stage, whistling a jaunty, tuneless melody, he walked past the row where Cadet Brock was sitting. He paused, leaned down, and gave the petrified Grok a friendly pat on his stony shoulder. Hey, chin up, big guy, Jake said with a wink. Don't feel too bad. We all have off days. Brock did not move. He did not breathe. He remained perfectly still for a full 5 minutes after Jake had left the room. In the stunned silence that followed, one of the SSSLR cadets finally found its voice, hissing to its neighbor in a terrified whisper. Did he say he wanted to eat a barbecue? Its neighbor, a fellow reptilian who looked like he had just seen the face of God and discovered it was hungry, slowly nodded. I think so. What is a barbecue? I have no idea, the first SSSLR whispered back, its eyes wide with primal fear. But I have a feeling it's what they do to the monsters they don't decide to keep as pets.